Hello and welcome back to Jack Knives Reviews. I am of course your host, Jack Knives. Today I will be reviewing Roald Dahl's Matilda the Musical. A brilliant young child, raised by two parents who are beyond self-centered, goes to a strict boarding school for children led by the tyrannical headmistress named Miss Trunchbull. A guiding light within the hollowed halls of this academy is the beautifully kind teacher named Miss Honey, who wants the children to thrive and be happy. Now it's up to Matilda and her mysteriously growing abilities to move objects with her mind to save the school, the children, Miss Honey, and herself. So I'm going to be doing something a bit different than what I normally do. I'm going to actually do a little bit of a pro and con compared to the original and this version of Matilda. But before I do that, I need to talk about the most jarring difference between them, the fact that this new version is a musical. You see, when the movie was being made, it was actually an adaptation of a Broadway show that they did of Matilda. And the Broadway show had a lot of critical praise. I believe it might have won a few Tony Awards, I could be mistaken. And honestly, if I just base it on the music is very, very good. It's very well paced. It has a great tone to it. It shifts between an interesting dynamic, positivity, negativity, but doesn't do it too over the top. And there's a lot of music to this movie. So, with just the musical aspect, it is a fantastic musical, especially for young kids. It's, got that kind of fantastical music setting, how, musicals can. Putting that aside, comparing the two, they're fairly different adaptation. Roald Dahl's work can sometimes be hard for people to adapt, even to the point where Roald Dahl himself or his estate may not like specific adaptations that you, in fact, enjoy. Good example, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. The one that we love with Gene Wilder, he hated. He absolutely could not stand it because it was so cynical. And he also didn't like the adaptation of Witches. And from what I could gather, I believe his widow didn't like the adaptation of Matilda. Because the problem is, a lot of adaptations focus only on the negative aspects of it and do it in a kind of half-hearted, positive way. And the problem is, Roald Dahl's work, yes, had negativity. Yes, had a dark overtone. But in the end, the story itself is one of positivity. These characters are positives in a world of negative. Whereas the adaptations they're negative, everyone's negative, the world is negative, and they're just lucky. And that doesn't really work if you're trying to adapt his work. The only way I could give this a fair comparison is to really just compare the characters. So let's start off with the main character, Matilda. So the problem with the original adaptation is, well, Mara Wilson, when she did acting, she really didn't want to do acting, and she just kind of always played a know-it-all. And yes, Matilda is technically a know-it-all because she is super intelligent, but she does it in such a I know more than you kind of way that just gets under your skin really easily. And considering it's supposed to be the main character, it just bugs you the wrong way, But there is a subtle charm to Mara Wilson's performance that there doesn't really seem to be with this new one. The new one is just a cute girl who's cute and smart. She doesn't really have much of a personality. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's the acting or the direction they've given the actress, but she's just like an insert. She's an insert actress for Matilda. I mean, from the clips I've seen of the Broadway version of Matilda, or the onstage performances of Matilda, or even, just different versions of, the musical, Matilda is a focal point, and she needs to capture the audience, and I don't think this actress does it very well. She's got to be able to engage in the audience, and she feels like she's reading a script. Mara Wilson at least felt like, she believed what she was saying. This character, not so much. Next, we'll move on to Miss Honey. Now, with Miss Honey, she is the positivity in the light of negativity within the Academy. And with that positivity, she has to emulate what makes a character positive in a world of negative. It's an attitude, it's a personality, it's an acceptance of the flaws of others and appreciating each and every person around them. And the new is amazingly good at it. You feel the actual emotion of her trauma, but her trauma doesn't let it control her. In the original, I didn't even know there was trauma behind it. They just glance over, Miss Trunchbull might have murdered my parents, but, what are you going to do? Anyway, the problem with the original Miss Honey is she was so hallmarky. The problem I had with the new Matilda is the same problem I have with the old Miss Honey. She was generic. She was only good because Miss Trunchbull was a terrible person by proxy. And because of that, it's, woohoo, she's nice because everyone else sucks. But the new one, Miss Honey, was kind. There are other characters that Matilda does interact with, like, for example, a bookshop owner that they never established in the original. But the reason they have the bookshop owner is because she's telling a reoccurring story that she's had in a dream, later to find out that dream, that story, is actually the story of Miss Honey's parents and what actually happened to them. The thing that they glance over in the original, that they barely mention in the original because they were worried it would be too dark. Yeah, they thought that was too dark. Not the 7-minute scene of the kid disgustingly eating a chocolate cake till he died almost. Not the part where they mention the chokey and they really don't clarify whether or not the kids survived them or not. They just kind of glance over that, but okay. But no, that's too far. When Miss Honey is telling her the story of her parents or just her own trauma or just the reason she lives in a shack, a literal shack, is because she's afraid. She's terrified, but she's still positive. She's still happy. She still has this overwhelming sense of love and care. The positivity she experiences is the joy of knowing she has these children to look after. And that's a beautiful thing that the original has nothing of. She's literally the most generic teacher archetype. Like, she has no personality. They literally, in fact, she has so little personality that they literally had to have a 3-minute montage after the movie where it's silent and it just shows her and Matilda getting along as if she's her daughter, because they were like, oh crap, we forgot to fill in time for the character development. But I digress. Next, we'll move on to Matilda's parents. In the new version, they're, two-faced and a little goofy. But more stupid, really, than anything else. And, they don't really want her around, and they're negligent, like, the other parents. But, they're harmlessly dull. They're dense. They're very dense. They're the generic British idiots that they were kind of depicted in the original book. But in the original, I would argue that the parents are 100,000 times worse than Miss Trunchbull. Miss Trunchbull just didn't like children. Her parents hated her in the original. Like, hated. Like, here's an example. If you haven't seen the movie, the opening scene, they put her in a baby seat shortly after she was born. And then they just leave her in the baby seat. Just like in the back of the car. And they leave her there for allegedly hours on end. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, that's the start of the movie. Yeah. And then at the end of the movie, they're trying to be like, oh, I actually cared about you. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. In the original, apparently, since she was 3 years old, she had been carrying around papers with legal documents actually giving her the ability to stay away from her parents, like legally become an adult. Basically, like subpoena yourself from your parents. She'd had that since she was 3 years old. And that wouldn't bug me as much if they didn't already have a child. They had another kid in the original. What the hell? If you hated having kids, why do you have one? Also, it was so weird. Danny DeVito's character is such a douchebag. Like, not even like evil, but like a dick. Just a dick for dick's sake. Like, there wasn't a single positive thing about him. Which I wouldn't care so much if he didn't also narrate the movie. So, I'm hearing this really kind version of Danny DeVito while I'm seeing an asshole Danny DeVito over here. It's so jarring. It doesn't make any sense. And they're two completely separate characters. Yeah, the new version of Matilda's dad is really dumb, but he's not like wanting to literally like torture her or like... There's parts in the movie where I'm like, how did no one see this as a bad thing in this movie? Like, I'm not trying to be like all PC. I mean this sincerely. The original movie is pretty messed up if you rewatch it, which I did for this review. But the real question is, who is the best Miss Trunchbull? The original or the new one? Well, let's look over the new one first. The new Miss Trunchbull has complete and utter school control. In fact, I believe she has like control over pretty much everyone around her. On top of that, you also get to see how she's so strict. Like, she has cameras everywhere, microphones everywhere, watches them all the time. Literally, when they go into her office and they show her office, they only show it about like 3 times. Her entire wall is full of cameras watching everyone. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what a lot of kids used to think their principals were like. If you had a terrible principal, that's what you would think as a kid. And so it kind of plays on that kind of imagination of a child of like, well, maybe like this evil, dictatory, unseen boss is really watching us and shh, can't talk. The old Miss Trunchbull ruled with an iron fist too. But what she did was she didn't have to watch you. She left you feeling uneasy just by her name. She kind of Voldemorted the whole school because she didn't have to say or do much, but she just walked by and you knew. Not only that, they really played hard on her being a winner in shot put, her javelin, her using big, strong sports and winning awards for them. The new one did have one scene that I was laughing really, really hard at. And it was, you know, the famous scene where she throws the girl by her pigtails. But in the original one, you know, she throws her by her pigtails and then, like, Matilda floats her away or whatever. But in the new one, she flings her across the school and she literally lands in an unforeseen bush and she just says, go see if that child's alive. Like, that's the tone of the movie. Like, just, like, that's hilarious. I'm sorry, that's really funny. But then, like, the other one, its comedy was forced. And the new one, the comedy felt goofy. You know, lighthearted. Like Roald Dahl himself. And I think that's what the main difference between the two are. So if I were to compare the Trunchbulls between them, I'd say the first one is far scarier. I'd say the parents are far scarier. But I'd also say the new one has a better positive outlook. And that's really the major difference between them. The dark moments are really dark in the original, but the light moments are really light in the new one. I believe that combined they would be the perfect adaptation, but as they stand alone, they're both vastly different. I mean, if I were to really sit down and rewatch them back to back, really just sit down and compare and contrast, and it would really seem more nitpicky than anything. But as it stands as an adaptation to the original Roald Dahl books, there's a reason that this version is actually called Roald Dahl's Matilda, and the other one is just called Matilda. And I think that speaks more volumes on which version is better for kids. I give Roald Dahl's Matilda the Musical 4.5 out of 5. Have you seen Roald Dahl's Matilda the Musical? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, I'll see you next time.